My name is Oliver, and I'm 42 years old. I work as a financial analyst in Seattle, Washington. I've always loved the city, the constant hum of activity, the coffee shops on every corner, the smell of rain that feels like a constant companion. Seattle has been home to me and my wife, Sophia, for the last decade. We met in college and have been married for 8 years. Sophia is a year younger than me and just started a new job as a marketing specialist. She's always been driven and passionate about her career, and I've always supported her ambitions. But lately, things have been different. I guess it all started when she began socializing more with her new colleagues. Sophia's new job brought her into a world of vibrant, outgoing people. Most of her new friends are either single or recently divorced. They live lives that seem carefree and exciting compared to our routine. At first, I was happy for her. It felt good to see her excited about new friends and new experiences. I thought it was important for her to have a life outside of our marriage. But then the late nights started. It was a gradual change at first. 1 or 2 nights out with friends turned into almost every night. Dinner plans we used to look forward to together were replaced by her outings. She'd come home buzzing with energy, sharing stories about her colleagues, especially Benjamin, her new manager. Benjamin was someone she couldn't stop talking about. At 38, he was seasoned in his career, confident, and well-respected. He had this charm that Sophia admired. Initially, I thought it was great she had found a mentor in him. But the more she talked about him, the more I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. One night, while we were having dinner, Sophia casually mentioned Benjamin's latest advice on a marketing campaign. Benjamin thinks we should pivot our approach to target a younger demographic, she said, eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. He's just so insightful. I nodded, trying to focus on her words rather than the unease growing inside me. He sounds like he knows his stuff, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Sophia's face lit up. He does. It's inspiring to work with someone who has so much experience. I wanted to be happy for her, but it was getting harder to ignore how often she mentioned him. Tried to brush off my feelings, telling myself I was just being paranoid. As the weeks went by, Sophia's late nights became more frequent. Sometimes she'd come home well past midnight, her explanations vague and unsatisfying. Our conversations grew shorter, often revolving around her new friends and work rather than us. I missed the days when we'd talk about everything and nothing, just enjoying each other's company. One Saturday evening, as I was preparing dinner, Sophia came in looking unusually serious. She sat down at the kitchen table and watched me in silence for a moment before speaking. "Oliver, can we talk?" she asked, her voice unusually soft. Turned off the stove and sat across from her. "Of course, what's on your mind?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about our marriage, about us, and I've realized that I feel like we missed out on some experiences because we've been together for so long." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I'm not saying I don't love you," she quickly added. "I do, but I think maybe we should consider opening our marriage, just to see what's out there, to experience things we never did." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. An open marriage. It was the last thing I expected to hear from her. I loved Sophia deeply, and the thought of her being with someone else was unbearable. But I could see she was serious, and more than that, she was unhappy. "I don't know, Sophia," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I mean, I love you. I'm not sure I can handle that." She reached out and took my hand, her eyes pleading. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I think it might help us. Help me." Please, just think about it. I spent the next few days lost in thought, torn between my love for Sophia and the fear of losing her. In the end, I agreed, hoping that giving her the freedom she wanted would bring us closer again. Maybe it would reignite the spark we once had. The decision marked the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, one filled with uncertainty and challenges I never imagined we'd face. As Sophia began to explore this new path, I could only hope that we find our way back to each other. The days following Sophia's suggestion to open our marriage were some of the most confusing and painful of my life. I felt like I was living in a fog, trying to navigate the complexities of a situation I never thought I'd face. But Sophia was determined to explore this new path, and despite my reservations, I decided to support her. We set some ground rules to make this arrangement as comfortable as possible. We agreed to be honest with each other about who we were seeing, and to prioritize our marriage above all else. It felt like a compromise I could manage, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of impending loss. The week after our conversation, Sophia had her first date. She told me she was going out with a guy from her new social circle, someone named David. That night, I stayed home, trying to distract myself with a movie, but my mind kept wandering. What was she doing? Was she having a good time? I felt a pang of jealousy mixed with a deep sadness. Sophia came home late again. This time, I was waiting in the living room, half-empty beer bottle in my hand. She looked surprised to see me still up. "Hey," she said softly, setting her purse down on the counter. "I didn't expect you to wait up." I shrugged, trying to appear casual. "I couldn't sleep." She sat down next to me, and I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not really," I replied, though my mind was racing with questions. "Did you have a good time?" She nodded. "Yeah, it was nice. We just talked and had a few drinks." Forced a smile. "I'm glad you had fun." There was a long silence. We were both feeling our way through this new, uncomfortable territory. Finally, she leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. "Thank you, Oliver. I know this isn't easy for you." After she went to bed, I sat there for a long time, staring at the TV without really seeing it. I knew I had to find a way to cope with this new reality or risk losing Sophia completely. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. Sophia went out a few more times, each time leaving me to wrestle with my feelings. Tried to throw myself into work, but my concentration was shot. My mind kept drifting back to Sophia and what she was experiencing. One Friday evening, I decided to join some colleagues for drinks after work. It was something I hadn't done in a while, and I figured it might help take my mind off things. We went to a new gastropub downtown, a place with exposed brick walls and an open kitchen. It was bustling with energy, a sharp contrast to the quiet of my thoughts. As I sipped my beer and listened to my coworkers' banter, I noticed a woman at the bar. She had dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail and was talking animatedly with the bartender. There was something about her that caught my eye, and before I knew it, I found myself walking over. "Hi," I said, feeling a bit out of my depth. "Mind if I join you?" She looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Not at all. I'm Charlotte." "Oliver," I replied, taking a seat next to her. "Nice to meet you." Charlotte was a chef, recently moved from South Korea, and had opened her own small restaurant nearby. We talked for hours, and I was struck by her passion for her work and her infectious enthusiasm. It was refreshing to connect with someone new, someone who didn't know about the tangled mess of my personal life. At one point, Charlotte looked at me curiously. "So, Oliver, what's your story?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's complicated," I said finally. I'm married, but we're trying something new. An open marriage, actually. Charlotte raised an eyebrow, but didn't seem shocked. That's interesting. I've known a few people who've tried that. How's it going for you? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Honestly, I don't know. It's been hard. I'm trying to be supportive, but it's tough seeing her with other people. Charlotte nodded sympathetically. Can imagine. It's a brave thing to try, though, to give each other that kind of freedom. Her words stuck with me. Was it bravery or desperation that led me to agree to this? Wasn't sure, but talking to Charlotte made me realize I wasn't alone in feeling lost and uncertain. Over the next few weeks, I saw Charlotte a few more times. We met for coffee, had dinner at her restaurant, and even went for a hike on one of Seattle's many trails. She was a breath of fresh air in the midst of my confusion, and I found myself looking forward to our time together. One evening, as we walked along the waterfront, Charlotte turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Oliver, do you think you'll ever be able to accept this new arrangement with Sophia? Paused, considering her question. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to, but another part just feels broken. Charlotte nodded, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. It's okay to feel that way. You're allowed to have doubts and fears. Just remember to be honest with yourself and with her. Her words resonated with me. Maybe it was time to have a real conversation with Sophia about how I was feeling, about my doubts and fears. I owed it to both of us to be honest. That night, as I lay in bed next to Sophia, I reached out and took her hand. She turned to look at me, surprised. Sophia, we need to talk, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I've been trying to support you, but I'm struggling with this. It's tearing me apart. She squeezed my hand, her eyes filling with tears. I know, Oliver. I can see it. Maybe we need to find another way, something that works for both of us. As we lay there, holding hands, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could find our way through this together. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were finally on the same page. Navigating through the aftermath of our talk, Sophia and I decided to take things slow. We agreed to focus more on us, to reconnect and understand what each of us needed. But even with our renewed commitment, the tension between the past and our attempts to rebuild was palpable. We started going to marriage counseling once a week. Dr. Lawson, our therapist, was a soft-spoken woman in her late 40s, with a calm demeanor that made it easy to open up. During our sessions, she encouraged us to express our feelings honestly but kindly. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the raw emotions bubbled to the surface, but it was a start. One evening, after a particularly challenging session, Sophia and I decided to take a walk around Green Lake. It was a favorite spot of ours, a place where we used to go when we needed to clear our heads or just enjoy each other's company. The familiar path around the lake, with the ducks gliding across the water and joggers passing by, felt oddly comforting. As we walked, Sophia broke the silence. I miss this, she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. Me too, I replied, looking at her. It's been a while since we just enjoyed being together. She nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and hope. I know. I'm sorry, Oliver, for everything. I'm sorry too, I said, squeezing her hand. We're both trying. That's what matters. For a moment, we walked in silence, letting the quiet companionship fill the space between us. It was these small steps that gave me hope we might find our way back to each other. While Sophia and I were working on our relationship, I found myself thinking more and more about Charlotte. Our time together had been a bright spot in the midst of my confusion, and I wondered if there could be something more between us. I didn't want to hurt Sophia, but I couldn't ignore the connection I felt with Charlotte. One afternoon, I met Charlotte for lunch at her restaurant. The place was cozy and inviting, with warm wooden tables and an open kitchen that filled the air with the aroma of freshly cooked food. Charlotte greeted me with a smile that instantly put me at ease. "How's everything going?" she asked as we sat down. "It's been tough," I admitted. "Sophia and I are trying to work things out, but it's complicated." Charlotte nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "Relationships usually are, but you're doing the right thing by facing it together." "I hope so," I said, taking a sip of my water. "What about you? How's business?" She brightened at the mention of her restaurant. "Busy, but in a good way. We're launching a new menu next week. You should come by and try it." "I'd love to," I replied, genuinely interested. "Your food is amazing." Charlotte laughed. "Thanks, Oliver. That means a lot." As we talked, I felt the weight of my troubles lighten. Charlotte's enthusiasm for her work and her easygoing nature made me feel at home. I realized that my feelings for her were growing, and I wasn't sure how to reconcile that with my commitment to Sophia. One evening, while Sophia and I were having dinner, she brought up something that caught me off guard. "Oliver," she began, hesitating slightly, "there's something I need to tell you about Benjamin." I felt my stomach tighten. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of fear and determination. "Before we agreed to open our marriage, Benjamin and we got close. It wasn't physical, but there were feelings. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, see it now." Her words hit me hard, a mix of betrayal and sadness washing over me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of how you'd react, and afraid of what it meant for us. Thought opening the marriage would make things clearer, but it only complicated everything." I stared at my plate, trying to process her confession. It felt like a blow to the fragile progress we had made. "I wish you had been honest with me from the start," I said quietly. "I know," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Oliver. I never meant to hurt you." We sat in silence, the weight of her revelation hanging heavily in the air. Didn't know what to say or how to feel. All I knew was that our journey was far from over, and the path ahead was more uncertain than ever. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I felt torn between my commitment to Sophia and the growing bond with Charlotte. I knew I had to make a decision, but it was one of the hardest choices I'd ever faced. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself driving to the waterfront. It was a place where I often went to think, the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore providing a sense of calm. I needed clarity, a moment to breathe and sort through the tangled mess of my thoughts. As I stood there, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized that I had to be true to myself. I couldn't continue living in this limbo, torn between two women I cared about deeply. It wasn't fair to Sophia, Charlotte, or myself. When I got home, Sophia was waiting for me. She looked up as I walked in, her expression anxious. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, sitting down across from her. "We need to." She took a deep breath, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, the weight of the past few months heavy between us. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she began, "and I realized that I need to focus on us, on our marriage." "I've been thinking too," I replied, my voice steady. and I think we need to take a step back from the open marriage. It's not working for me, and I don't think it's helping us." Sophia nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I agree. Want to make things right with you, Oliver. I want us to be okay again." "I want that too," I said, reaching out to take her hand. "But it's going to take time. We need to be patient and honest with each other." As we sat there, holding hands, I felt a flicker of hope. It wouldn't be easy, but maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. It was a long road ahead, but for the first time in a while, I felt like we were on the right path. Navigating the days after Sophia's revelation felt like walking a tightrope. The trust between us had been deeply shaken, and every interaction seemed fragile, like it could break at any moment. Even though we had decided to step back from the open marriage and focus on repairing our relationship, the lingering pain from her emotional connection with Benjamin was hard to ignore. One evening, as we sat in the living room watching a show, I felt a growing sense of distance. The laughter on the screen felt forced, and the silence between us was louder than any dialogue from the TV. "Sophia," I said, turning to her, "we need to talk." She muted the TV and looked at me, a mix of concern and apprehension in her eyes. "What's on your mind?" I feel like we're going through the motions," I began, searching for the right words. "We're trying, but it's like there's this invisible wall between us." Sophia sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I know. It's been really hard to rebuild trust after everything that's happened. I want to make things better, but I'm not sure how." I nodded, appreciating her honesty. "Me neither. Maybe we need to take a step back and think about what we really want, both as individuals and as a couple." She looked down, playing with the edge of the blanket draped over her lap. "You mean, like a break?" "Not necessarily," I said quickly, "but maybe we need to give each other some space to figure things out. I think we both need time to heal." Sophia's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "I agree. Maybe some time apart will help us see things more clearly." The next day, I packed a bag and headed to my brother's apartment. Tom had always been my go-to guy for advice, and his place was like a second home to me. As I walked up to his front door, I felt a pang of guilt and relief all at once. Tom greeted me with a hug and a concerned look. "Hey, man, everything okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "Sophia and I are taking a break. Just need some time to think." He nodded, leading me inside. "Stay as long as you need. We'll get through this." I settled into the guest room, grateful for the refuge. That evening, Tom and I sat on the balcony, beers in hand, as the city lights of Seattle twinkled in the distance. "So, what's going on?" Tom asked, his tone gentle but probing. I took a deep breath and told him everything. Sophia's emotional connection with Benjamin, the open marriage, and my complicated feelings for Charlotte. It felt good to unload, to say everything out loud. "Sounds like you've been through the ringer," Tom said, shaking his head. "But you're doing the right thing by taking time to figure things out." "I hope so," I replied, feeling the weight of my decisions. "Just don't know if Sophia and I can get back to where we were." Tom looked thoughtful. "Sometimes things don't go back to how they were, but that doesn't mean they can't move forward in a different way. You just have to figure out what you really want and what's best for both of you." During my time at Tom's, I spent a lot of time reflecting. I went for long walks, revisiting places that held memories of happier times with Sophia. One evening, I found myself at our favorite coffee shop, the same one where we had spent countless hours in college. As I sipped my coffee, thought about the person I was then and the person I had become. Somewhere along the way, the simple joy we shared had gotten lost in the chaos of life and unmet expectations. I realized that, despite everything, I still cared deeply for Sophia, but I also couldn't ignore the new feelings I had developed for Charlotte. Later that week, Charlotte called. She had sensed something was off when I didn't show up at the restaurant like I usually did. "Hey, Oliver," she said, her voice warm and concerned. "I've missed seeing you. Everything okay?" I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Sophia and I are taking a break. Things have been really tough, and I needed some time to think." "I'm sorry to hear that," Charlotte said softly. "If you need to talk or just want to get out, you know where to find me." "Thanks, Charlotte," I said, feeling a mix of gratitude and confusion. "I appreciate it. I'll definitely take you up on that." Few days later, I decided it was time to talk to Sophia. We needed to discuss our next steps, whatever they might be. Drove back to our house, my mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts and scenarios. When I walked in, Sophia was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red from crying. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, I broke the silence. "Sophia, we need to talk about where we go from here." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I've been thinking a lot, and I realize that we can't keep doing this. It's not fair to either of us." "I agree," I said, sitting down across from her. "We need to figure out what we want, and if that means staying together or going our separate ways." Sophia took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. "I love you, Oliver, but I think we've both changed so much, and maybe we need to let each other go to find out who we really are now." Her words hit me hard, but I knew she was right. We had both grown in different directions, and it was time to face that reality. "I love you too, Sophia," I said quietly. "And maybe letting go is the best thing we can do for each other right now." We sat there in silence, holding hands across the table, both mourning the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. It wasn't the ending I had imagined, but it was honest, and maybe that was enough. Returning to my brother's apartment after that conversation with Sophia felt like a fresh start, even if it was tinged with sadness. We had finally acknowledged the need to move on, to let each other go, and that clarity, however painful, was a step forward. The days that followed were a mix of introspection and quiet conversations with Tom. He was a steady presence, helping me process my thoughts without pushing too hard. One evening, as we sat on his balcony, I shared my feelings about the future. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next," I said, staring at the Seattle skyline. "It's strange, but there's this sense of relief mixed with the sadness." Tom nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "It's like you're finally letting go of a heavy weight, even if it's hard to say goodbye." "Exactly," I replied. Sophia and I were holding on to something that wasn't working anymore. Now, there's room to explore what we really want. He gave me a supportive smile. "So, what's your plan? What's the first step in this new chapter?" I thought about it for a moment. "I think I need to spend some time focusing on myself, maybe take a break from relationships and just figure out who I am outside of being someone's husband." Tom raised his bottle in a mock toast to new beginnings and figuring things out. "You've got this, Oliver." During this period of reflection, I also found myself thinking about Charlotte. I hadn't reached out since moving in with Tom, needing space to sort through my emotions. But now, felt ready to talk to her. Called Charlotte, and we arranged to meet at the coffee shop, where we had first talked about life and dreams. When I walked in, She was already there, looking out the window with a thoughtful expression. "Hey, Charlotte," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thanks for meeting me." She smiled warmly. "Of course, Oliver. I'm glad you reached out. How have you been?" "It's been a roller coaster," I admitted. "Sophia and I decided to separate. It was a hard decision, but it feels like the right one." Charlotte reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "I'm sorry to hear that. I know how much you tried to make things work." "Thanks," I said, appreciating her empathy. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about what I want and need. I realized that I need to take some time to figure things out on my own." She nodded, her eyes understanding. "That makes sense. It's important to take care of yourself and find your own path." "Yeah," I agreed. "I also wanted to tell you that I've really enjoyed the time we spent together. You brought a lot of light into a difficult time, and I'm grateful for that." Charlotte's smile was bittersweet. "I'm glad I could be there for you, Oliver. Whatever you decide, just know that I'm here, supporting you as a friend." "Thanks, Charlotte," I said, feeling a sense of peace. "That means a lot to me." In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I spent time with friends, picked up hobbies I had neglected, and found solace in small, everyday routines. Work became a grounding force, giving me structure and a sense of purpose. One evening, as I was leaving the office, my manager, Mike, caught up with me. "Hey, Oliver, got a minute?" "Sure," I replied, curious. Mike smiled. "I just wanted to check in. You've been doing great work, and I know things have been tough personally. If you need anything, just let me know." "Thanks, Mike," I said, genuinely touched. "I appreciate the support. It's been a challenging time, but I'm getting through it." Mike nodded. "You're handling it well. Just remember to take care of yourself too." Walking home that night, I felt a sense of gratitude. Despite the upheaval, there were people in my life who cared and supported me. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone, even in the midst of significant change. Few months later, Sophia and I finalized our separation. It was an amicable process, filled with mutual respect and a shared understanding that we were both seeking happiness, even if it wasn't together. We met one last time at our old house, now almost empty, to exchange keys and say our goodbyes. "Sophia," I began, my voice steady, "I just want you to know that I hope you find the happiness you're looking for." She smiled, a mixture of sadness and hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Oliver. I wish the same for you. We've been through a lot, and I'm grateful for the good times we had." As we hugged one last time, I felt a weight lift. It wasn't the ending I had envisioned, but it was an honest and necessary one. We were both free to explore new possibilities and find our paths. As I walked away from the house that had been our home, I felt a mixture of emotions: sadness for what was lost, but also a sense of excitement for what lay ahead. I was stepping into a new chapter, uncertain but hopeful. I knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it with an open heart and mind. Life had a way of surprising you, and I was determined to embrace whatever came next. If you found the story interesting, please subscribe to the channel, press the bell, and don't forget to give us a like. Thanks for watching. See you all soon.